All right, in this video, we are going to be discussing two-step equations. This is part of Pre-Algebra Unit 2, Equations and Equalities. All right, so this is a copy of the guided notes that my students will be completing. This is the note side. If you don't have these notes, you can copy it down on a notebook piece of paper. And this is the practice that students will be completing in Canvas. All right, so this here is a quick little review of what different parts of an equation are. So in order to solve an equation, we must first know what the parts of an equation are. So we have the constant. There we go. So we have an exponent, which is the little number above a variable. It follows the variable. The constant is the number that is alone or by itself. It does include the sign that's in front of the number. The coefficient is the number that is right next to the variable. And a coefficient really means that something is being multiplied times the variable. So if we have the equation 3x minus 8 is equal to 4 minus x, we want to identify the following. We want to identify the constants and the coefficient and the variables together. So first, let's make a list of our constants. We have -8, and then we have this 4, but really because there is no sign in front of this 4, it's going to be a positive 4. Then our coefficients and variables. We first have our 3x, which this is a positive 3x because there is no sign in front of it, so that's an implied positive. And then we have our negative x, which is really a negative 1x. So some of you may read this as 4 subtract x or 4 minus x. Really, it's a negative 1 that is being multiplied to the x. So some things to remember moving forward is that the sign is attached to the term that follows. So these signs are attached to the terms. Okay, so whenever you're doing something, so inverse operations that we're going to get to in a second, you have to remember that the sign that's in front of the number or in front of the term is attached to the term that follows or the number that follows. And another thing to note here is that the negative sign, the subtraction sign, the minus sign, they are all the same. They all mean the exact same thing. They are all equivalent. That's one of my biggest pet peeves is having students ask, is that a negative sign or a subtraction sign? Well, they are all the same. It doesn't matter. Either way, you have negative or minus something. Okay? So let's get into our vocab. We have our expression, which is a statement with a minimum of 2 numbers and variables in at least one math operation. There is no equal sign in an expression. Then we have equations, which is a statement that contains 2 expressions and an equal sign. Then we have a variable, and a variable is an unknown number that we need to solve for. So it's a symbol for an unknown value, usually a letter like X or Y. Then we have solving an equation, which is our goal to get to today. And when we are solving an equation, we are finding the value of the variable or the unknown. So here we have an example, x, or an unknown number, plus 4 is equal to 9. What is the value of x? So what number plus 4 is equal to 9? Well, most of you are going to sit there and say, well, it's 5. So we solved this equation because we know that 5 plus 4 is equal to 9. So when we are solving one-step equations, we are going to use the inverse or opposite operation. So the opposite or inverse of adding, so here we have x plus 4 equals 6. The opposite of that would be to subtract 4. And remember, whenever we're solving an equation, whatever we do to one side of the equal sign of an equation, we must do to the other. So our side of the equation, and I can draw it on here real quick. This is a side of an equation, x plus 4, and the 6 is the other side of the equation. So whatever we do to one side, we must do to the other. So we have a positive 4, so we're going to subtract 4 from both sides, and we know that x is equal to 2. So we can always check our math, because does 2 plus 4 equal 6? Well, yes, 2 plus 4 does equal 6, so we know we have the correct solution. Here in our next example, we have x minus 3 is equal to negative 10. So we are going to, instead of subtract 3, we want to do the inverse or opposite, or really what our goal here is to make this equal 0. So negative 3 plus 3. I have to add 3 to the other side as well. And negative 10 plus 3 is going to be negative 7. So when I get x is equal to negative 7, then I can plug it into my equation and see if I have the correct answer. Then we have x, which is being divided by 2. And because it is being divided by 2, what we have to do is actually multiply by 2 in order to get it out of the denominator. Another way you could see this is 1/2 times x. Okay, so in order to get rid of that 2 in the denominator, we multiply by 2, and remember, whatever we do on one side, we must do to the other. So x is equal to 6, which makes sense because 6 divided by 2 does equal 3. That lines up. Finally, we have 1.25x. Now remember, this is a coefficient, and coefficients are being multiplied to the variable. So if I have 1.25x is equal to 5, the operation in order to remove the 1.25 would be division. So I'm going to divide both sides of my equation by 1.25, and 5 divided by 1.25 is equal to 4. So does 1.25 times 4 equal 5? Yes. All right, now let's get into some two-step equations. Two-step equations are similar to one-step, however, there will be 2 steps in order to solve for the variable. So we are going to use the order of operations, so PEMDAS, in reverse order. So first we are going to add or subtract, where typically you would do that last according to order of operations. We are now going to do it first. Then second, we are going to multiply or divide by the coefficient. So when it says first add or subtract, we are first going to add or subtract the constant, the number that's by itself, and then second, we are going to multiply or divide by the coefficient. There is one exception to the rule. If we have an equation that is written as a fraction, so x plus 1 over 2, then we actually do have to multiply by the 2 that's in the denominator first before we can subtract the 1. All right, so let's get through example 5 here. So we have 2x plus 4 is equal to 18. The plus 4 is our constant. That's what we have to move first. So if we have a positive 4, our inverse operation is going to be to subtract 4 from both sides. Once we subtract 4 from both sides, we are left with negative 2x is equal to 14. Then that negative 2 is being multiplied because that's the coefficient of the x. So we're going to divide by negative 2. And when we divide both sides by negative 2, we get x is equal to 7. Or sorry, negative 7. 14 divided by negative 2 is a negative 7. We can then plug that in to check our answer. All right, in example number 6, we have 1/4 x plus 4 is equal to 12. We are going to subtract 4 from both sides because that's the constant, so we want to move the constant first. Once we subtract 4 from both sides, we are going to worry about that fraction, 1/4 x. So anytime I have a fraction, or what's really happening is x is being divided by 4, in order to get rid of that fraction, we're going to multiply by what's in the denominator. So 1/4, we're going to multiply by 4, and whatever I do to one side of the equation, I have to do to the other. So I'm going to do 8 times 4, and x is equal to 32. I can then plug that 32 in for the x to make sure I have the correct answer, and I do. All right, in this next example, I have 3.5 plus 6x equals 45.5. Now, a lot of students were stumped because the constant, the number without the variable, was listed first. It can be listed in any order. Still, it's just a constant, so that constant needs to be moved to the other side of the equation or away from the variable. So we do that by subtracting the 3.5. And then we're left with 6x is equal to 42. And because that's the coefficient, 6, which is being multiplied to the x, we are now going to divide both sides of the equation by 6. And then finally, we have x is equal to 7. Then we can plug it in and check our answer. Finally, we have one last question. We have x minus 5, which is being divided by 3, is equal to 7. So because this is showing division, a fraction shows division, in order to get rid of the 3 in the denominator, we're going to multiply by 3 on both sides of the equation. And then we're left with x minus 5 is equal to 21. So we're going to add 5 to both sides. And we find that x is equal to 26. Then we can plug that in. Does x minus 5 divided by 3 equal 7? Yes. There we go. That is it for the two-step equations notes. I hope this helps.